Kate Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Welcome to our Saturday book. We are on video number 5 of Going Hollywood, Midwesterners in Movieland by Sara Jordan-Heintz. And I don't think I'm speaking out of line when I say that the author will soon be joining us to talk about this book. And it'll be fun because we'll get to compare our favorites, and I have a feeling there'll be more inside stories. I hope this has been a good departure. The next book I'm going to do will be more serious, although also entertaining. This book has been a real pleasant escape for me. So I hope you feel the same way. And I hope you guys are checking out some of these movies. It's interesting to go back and feels like a different planet. This week, we're going to talk about Jane Russell. Let me see, I'll show you a picture of Jane Russell here on the cover. She may look familiar. Jane Russell. Gentlemen Prefer Brunettes is the subtitle. She had a sex pot image as opposed to being a wife and a mom. And she actually co-founded a Hollywood Christian group. And she was very religious, and she was involved in the World Adoption International Fund. She was very active in international adoptions. So there were a lot of layers to her. There was a lot more to her than meets the eye. Born June 21st, 1921, in Bemidji, Minnesota. Bemidji, I think that may feature in the movie Fargo. One of the few places other than Fargo that I know of in Minnesota. Her real full name is Ernestine Jane Geraldine Russell. And she came from a very strict Episcopalian background. Her mother was one of 5 children. Her father was one of the original white frontier families of, I wrote NK, which is North Korea. We all know that's wrong. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say North Dakota, because his grandfather did live in North Dakota. Her grandfather lived in North Dakota. Her father spent 5 years in the Canadian Army and would go to North Dakota to be with his grandfather in the winter time. So obviously it's not North Korea. Sorry about that. During the Depression, his father actually had a pretty decent job. He worked for the Jergens company. You know, the lotion and the soap. My mother always used Jergens. Her father got promoted inside this big factory and got sent to Glendale, California. So the family moved, but they made a lot of trips back home to the Midwest. They always considered that home. They had a very affluent life in California. They had a little ranch. They had horses. They were a very close family, very traditional, strong family unit. Her mother posed for paintings, and a portrait of her mother was bought by President Woodrow Wilson, called The Girl in the Blue Hat. So her family was famous before they were famous. When she was 16 in 1937, her father had a stroke and died. But they were a very strong, cohesive family unit, and they managed to keep their ranch by joining forces, all of them working together and pooling their resources. She did her family laundry by hand. And you know, it's really hard to wrap your head around that. Except I remember that my mother had this newfangled invention, this big enamel tub bigger than a person, that she would haul out into the yard and fill with a hose to do laundry. I don't know if the hose was attached to hot water. I certainly hope so. It had a wringer and a scrubbing board, like cardboard, you know, that I forget the term, but a scrubbing board. And this is how she did her laundry. My mother-in-law, who was a bit older and grew up in America, used to talk about doing her laundry with a scrubbing board in the bathtub. And that's within the last century. So Jane Russell did her family laundry by hand. At 17, she had an affair with college football player who'd been at her high school. They had known each other. This was dramatic and turbulent, and he felt like life was just a big game, and he didn't tolerate differences of opinion, a real man of his times. He was a spoiled boy. She always felt that she had been born married, very conventional woman. She believed that marriage was the most important thing for women and the only way that women could really achieve happiness. These are her words, not mine. In 1939, she graduated from high school and went on to drama school. And she tagged along one day with a friend who went to a modeling session. And the photographer took one look at her and went, "Oh," and sent her to 20th Century Fox for a screen test. Anybody who might not be familiar with that, young people would show up at the studio, of course, by appointment, and it was difficult to get an appointment. To arrange a screen test was a big hurdle. And they would go in and they would film them. Nowadays, we're all doing our own screen tests. Really, it's a different world. In those days, people didn't have access to selfies and videos and YouTube and, all that stuff. And they would go in and they would talk to them, have a conversation, sometimes give them a little bit of a thing to perform, and observe how they photographed, how they looked on camera, because that can be a huge difference. You might have all the charisma in the world and it doesn't translate onto the screen. Conversely, some people had kind of a blah affect when you meet them in real life. You get them in front of a camera and they appear to come to life. And that had to be tested. She was classified unphotogenic. Let me remind you, we're talking about Jane Russell. She was classified unphotogenic. Style. It's got to do with what's in style. She took a job in a box folding factory. Then she became a doctor's assistant. Then she was back visiting her family in Hollywood, and an agent saw her and actually saw her pictures and called to ask her to test for a picture. And the next day, she met Howard Hawks, the director of her very first film, Outlaw. Famous film, famous director, her first movie. So kismet, right? Howard Hughes owned the studio, and he saw her, and he immediately, was attracted to her. And someday I have to do a video about Howard Hughes, because he was a big, gigantic weirdo, and he was too shy to meet her, but he orchestrated things in the background. So at the age of only 19, with absolutely no experience, she got a contract with the studio, a new wardrobe, a car, and a role in a big film. It was shot in Arizona, and many fan magazines would show up, kind of like paparazzi. They know that there was a movie being filmed out in the desert or something, and they'd all congregate to get pictures, hopefully maybe get an interview with somebody. And she was photographed, and she was set up very quickly by the fan magazines as kind of a sex pot. There were fights between Hawks and Hughes. Hughes was a difficult person. I'm casually throwing out the term weirdo. He had some serious mental health issues. There was something really wrong with Howard Hughes, and it escalated as he got older. And we all, if we don't know, I'm going to have to make a video about Howard Hughes because that's a really interesting story. I've read a couple of books years ago to talk about that. But he didn't get along with a lot of people, and they had a fight, he and the director, Howard Hawks, and Hawks quit. And the whole crew had to go back to the MGM lot. Hughes was obsessed. He was literally diagnostically was an obsessive, and he micromanaged everything. For example, one shot, they did 103 takes. Imagine being the person to repeat the line 103 times. Hughes designed a bra for Jane Russell, controlling. She hated it. It was uncomfortable. He engineered it. I think he started out as an airline designer, mechanic, engineer, flyer person. He was technically inclined, and he designed this bra according to the laws of physics. She said, I never wore his bra. He could design planes, but Mr. Playtex, he wasn't. It took them 9 months to film this movie when the average movie would film in 6 to 8 weeks. This just sort of gives you a sense of what it was like to work with Howard Hughes. And then the Hayes office, the censorship office, the movie police said it was too risque. Luella Parsons, who always had an opinion, whether we asked her or not, she blamed Howard Hughes and said that he was exploiting Jane, that he was obsessed about her, and a lot of the film was focused on, her breasts, basically. But she got back together with the football guy and got pregnant. And she decided to have an abortion, and the first try didn't work, and she almost died. Now, I'm assuming that, it was illegal, and I'm assuming that whoever did it didn't know what they were doing, but there were a lot of disreputable failed doctors, doctors who'd lost their licenses for substance abuse or failed tests or whatever, who did it as a sideline. There's one that's really interesting that might be related to the Black Dahlia story, which we'll go into. Anyway, they had to do a second procedure, and she almost died, and it made her infertile. So obviously she got septic, obviously that must have been what happened. Not giving medical advice, YouTube. The movie became a sensation, and her mother and her aunt were really unhappy about this whole thing. Hang on here. Her family wasn't happy with her newfound persona. Her Aunt Ernie demanded to speak with Howard Hughes about her niece's public image. Quote, "You're selling my niece as though she were some cheap stripper, and I don't think that's right," she complained. Hughes, in his usual way, responded, "I can't very well sell her like Shirley Temple." But the problems with Russell's image didn't stop there. As popular as the Western was becoming, not everyone hailed it as a box office triumph. The Catholic Church spoke out against the picture, going as far as to excommunicate any parishioners who saw it. Jane always felt she fell prey to Hollywood type casting because of that role. I think her instincts were accurate. Just a little aside, the Catholic Church has what they call an imprimatur, which is seal of approval, and imprimatur, and it was the okay from the official church censors that something was appropriate to be seen or read or attended. Media that you would consume was considered safe. Okay. And a lot of books, were condemned, and movies too, by the Catholic Church. So they got married in Vegas, mostly to try to improve her image. For him, sports were number one. He became the number one quarterback with the Rams. She made two films with Robert Mitchum, and they became lifelong friends. Robert Mitchum is a very interesting man. They became lifelong friends. He he said he would tease her about her God-fearing ways, but he understood that she was no Loretta Young, wallowing in piety. He loved to tell the one about the pestering reporter who could not believe a girl with her image read the Bible and went to church every Sunday. And she confronted the reporter by quipping, "Hey, buddy, Christians have big breasts too." So she apparently had a sense of humor. In 1952, she did the Las Vegas Story, and it was released in Los Angeles. And she actually had a black eye that her husband gave her, so we know what was going on there. To strengthen their marriage, because this is always a good idea, this always works, they adopted a little girl named Tracy and later a slightly older little boy from Ireland. And the adoption was challenged because he'd been born in England. So apparently he ended up in some sort of orphanage foster care situation in Ireland, and the English government got, fussy about it. That wasn't the word I was going to use. I'm being good. So she began to work with the State Department to improve foreign adoption laws. She made the movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with Marilyn Monroe. She liked Marilyn, but she remembered that she had a lot of insecurities. She had a very overbearing coach, which we're well aware of, and she had a problem with being on time. And we know that this wasn't a diva move. This was Marilyn backstage somewhere freaking out from security. But the movie was a big box office hit, and she got to put her feet in cement and her hands at Grauman's Chinese Theater. I think the impression, pardon the pun, the impression I had from the hands and feet in the cement at Grauman's was people have gotten bigger over time. Body types come and go, but hands and feet are, they may get fatter or thinner, but length, which indicates height often, it's kind of remarkable how much bigger we've become, even in just a century. Her husband retired from playing football and became the assistant coach. She worked on adoptions and found it, busy. She had been working with the UN and then got busy. In 1953, there was the passage of the Federal Orphan Adoption Amendment of the Special Immigration Act. So they changed the laws. Then she helped create the World Adoption International Fund, which raised money for chapters all over the place. She was a member of the Hollywood Christian group that met at different stars' homes. She said that she had a message from God for Judy Garland, and passing this message on afterwards, Judy Garland had a big comeback. And of course, they attributed it to intervention of God. Howard Hughes didn't like that she was so family oriented and a churchgoer. It was in conflict with the image he wanted her to have. But they did stay friends, and she always spoke out in support of him. Well, gratitude. He was instrumental in really kicking off her career. Because you can be as talented and beautiful as anything in the world, but you need luck too. In 1955, she made her last RKO film called Underwater, which premiered in a movie at the bottom of a lake. And she and the crowd all wore scuba gear. I don't remember reading this, and I'm looking at it like, did I write that down wrong? But now I'm kind of remembering now it was true. Howard Hughes then helped her get a new contract, and she was the first ever to sign a contract for $1 million. She made the Russell Field products with her husband. This was the first movie, what's it called? Sequel to Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it was called But Gentlemen Marry Brunettes. And it was not a hit. They adopted their third child, second son, Bucky. There were rumors that her relationship with Howard Hughes was not platonic, but they really truly were only friends. Those in the know knew that they were just friends. Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures, greeted Russell for the first time, saying, "Well, I'm glad to meet you. You're the only girl around Howard Hughes who doesn't sleep with him, I hear." She replied, "Oh, there are quite a few of us, but it's nice to know the word's out." She had a quick wit. She went on to sign with 20th Century Fox, and her production company, which she started her own production company, made movies, some without her in them, and not all of them were very great. In 1957, she did Dream of Singing, and she did Dream of Singing. That's not the name of a movie. My shorthand is a little inadequate here. In 1957, she had this Dream of Singing, and she did a solo show at the Sands in Vegas. And she really had a beautiful voice, and she did a gospel style, which was unusual for the time. In 1960, she stopped producing movies. Her husband became head coach of the Rams, so she's still with this guy. In 1961, she tried Broadway for several years and apparently was quite good. Her husband was violent and unfaithful. She drank to deal with it, and she had affairs. In July of 1968, they had a divorce that ended a 25-year roller coaster. Her second husband was a co-star, Roger Barrett. This is a cute story. She was late for the wedding. She was late for the wedding ceremony because she got locked out of the church. November 18th of 1968, he collapsed from a blood clot and died at the age of 47. Didn't Ann Baxter have a husband that died suddenly too, or am I just conflating? It's really tragic. She had to meet contractual obligations to perform on stage or plays that she was doing, and she's a trooper. She was a success despite this great sudden tragedy. Then she met a real estate broker, John Peoples. She proposed to him. They were married January 31st, 1974, and they lived in Sedona, Arizona. It was truly a love match, and she then got in a car wreck, a DUI. She spent 4 days in jail, and she stopped drinking. This was her rock bottom. Let's see here. So in 1975, she said this. She reflected on her career. "I never got to do what I wanted to do. What that would have been, I don't know, but I kind of got stuck in an either-or situation. Either it was a Western or a musical. There were no in-betweens." In 1983, she made her last film called The Yellow Rose, a made-for-television movie. Her first husband, Robert Waterfield, passed away the same year. She won many charity and humanitarian awards over the years. And her organization for adoptions helped place more than 50,000 children in homes. In 1999, her husband died and she moved to Santa Monica. She joined a move to put the Bible in schools. So we kind of know where she'd fall today, you know. 60,000 children can now read the Bible, she said. She also sparked controversy as a pro-life supporter and was a self-professed, narrow-minded, right-wing conservative Christian. She did an interview with Robert Mitchum for Turner Classic Movies, and apparently it was painful. Mitchum was in poor health. He had lung cancer. He was dying. It was terrible. So despite her relationship drama, of which there was plenty, and her alcohol and the rumors about her, personal life, she was a religious person. So she espoused it anyway. She died February 28th, 2011, at the age of 89. She caught a cold and it turned into respiratory failure and she died. So that was the great Jane Russell. And we've got plenty of time, so I'm going to do somebody else. This is a very interesting person, and I'm willing to bet most people don't know a lot about her, which will come as no surprise. African American. Her name is Dorothy Dandridge. Like a Lotus in Bloom is the subtitle. She was called by Ebony magazine, this is a quote, Hollywood's first authentic love goddess of color. She was born November 2nd, 1922 in Cleveland. Okay. Her mother had just left her father, and so their marriage split up even before Dorothy was born. Her father was a described mama's boy. Her father was biracial. Her mother was Jamaican, Native American, and Spanish. Her mother sued her father for child support, $10 whole a week, which was very unusual for a biracial woman in the 1920s. I don't think I need to elaborate on why. I think we all know why. Let's just say they didn't have a lot of champions in the court system. He convinced his children, she convinced his children that he wanted nothing to do with them. And she even went on to say he was dead when he wasn't. One Christmas, her mother told the kids Santa Claus was coming to visit, and in walked their dead father. They were told to wait upstairs, and they heard fighting going on downstairs. They were crying and upset because they thought she was fighting with Santa Claus, and they discovered this was their father, who wasn't really dead. But they did get divorced, and Dorothy had a brief meeting with him when she was 16. She was performing at the Cotton Club, but that went nowhere. Her mother took advantage of churches to showcase her daughter's talents. She also took them to Black women's groups. So, church congregations would have, recitals, reviews, performances, even church services, and they would go and they would perform, she and her sister. Dot and Viv, the two sisters formed this group called the Wonder Children. And they toured the South for 5 years with vaudeville. Their mother was controlling and obsessed with their non-existent sexual exploits. So this is weird situation going on here, and I'm going to scratch the surface, but I'll have to ask Sara about this. Her mother had a female friend that she called their aunt, a woman named Geneva. And she was kind of given the responsibility to deal with the two girls most of the time. Dorothy, as an adult, later told her manager that there was that kind of mistreatment at the hands of this woman, Geneva, when she was 6 years old, when Dorothy was 6 years old. Being circumspect because, YouTube. In 1930, she moved to Watts in part of LA. They all did, the mother, the aunt, and the two sisters. They moved to Watts to benefit the girls' careers, and they didn't move to Hollywood because Black people were relegated to certain neighborhoods. In 1934, Dorothy got some bit parts in movies, and she faced a lot of kind of harassment, you might assume. And she was barred from the homes of her white friends. And she was so traumatized by the substance abuse that she saw in her neighborhood around her that she was a lifelong teetotaler. It really freaked her out. It's important to remember the historical context here. This is only 60, 70 years since the end of Reconstruction. So the height of Jim Crow laws in the South. And vaudeville's still alive, So the girls, the two sisters, went to dance schools, and they recruited a third member, Etta Jones. Dorothy entered a radio talent contest. The three of them copied the Andrews sisters, was their shtick. They got first place, and they spent 6 months with a traveling circus in Hawaii. They were seen there by talent agent Joe Glasser, and he decided to put them in a string of films. They were a novelty act. The first was 1935, Teacher's Beau, which was an Our Gang film. If you remember Our Gang, later The Little Rascals, Spanky and Our Gang, not just a band in the 60s. Little children actually acting out life as adults, working and doing pretty funny stuff. They were booked at the Cotton Club. They sang with Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington. They performed on the radio. They performed in stage acts. And then they went to London and performed at the Palladium. But in World War II broke out, and we all know what happened. Everything got canceled. They went back. Etta, who was number 3 in this trio, she left to get married. In 1944, Dorothy met the Nicholas brothers, which I looked them up. I watched some performances of theirs. I also listened to an interview of one of them when he was old, and his version and her version are really, really dramatically different. I believe her. Harold pursued her. This is one of the Nicholas brothers, and she said no, she wasn't interested. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she didn't fool around, and he did, and he called her the lady. She preferred cooking at home and working out. She scrapbooked. She was a homebody. Her sister Vivian went solo, and Dorothy did a stage review called Meet the People, which was a huge hit. They made it into a movie, but then it had an all-white cast, of course. One studio executive told Dandridge, quote, "The South isn't ready for colored actors." Now, these are his words, not mine. "The picture would get shut out of a lot of key spots if it was made like the play with a multiracial cast. I'm afraid there's no place for sentiment in this business. We'd like to use more people from the play, but it just can't be done." So she finally succumbed to pressure and agreed to marry Harold, get the name right, Nicholas, Harold Nicholas. But she had a fear of intimacy. She had never done anything. And this is because of her childhood trauma. And there's a description of what happened between her and him in the book. You need to read this book. I'm not telling you everything, and it's really an interesting book full of great pictures. And this is one of the stories that I don't feel comfortable repeating on YouTube because I'll get in trouble. So you can imagine. It's graphic, very troubling, very disturbing. And her whole relationship with Harold was tumultuous. And look them up. Look them up on YouTube. There's an interview with him that's really revelatory. In a few months, she got pregnant, and he was touring Europe. She spent most of her time with her two friends, Marilyn Monroe and Ava Gardner. And I remember from the Marilyn Monroe book, The Real Marilyn Monroe, written by Sarah's father, Larry Jordan, and he's coming back to talk here soon. We had a chat scheduled just the other day, and the internet went out. So you're welcome. my internet imps work again. It was his internet, not mine this time, which is an enormous relief for me to not be the one at fault. Anyway, he, in his book, his exhaustive, beautifully researched book about Marilyn Monroe, he talks about the fact that Marilyn embraced friendship with Dorothy Dandridge, and that was extremely unusual for the time and place. When other people shunned her in Hollywood because of her race, Ava Gardner and Marilyn Monroe defended her and stood by her side. She had a daughter, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas, they called Lynn, born September 2nd of 1943. And by the time she was of preschool age, it was obvious that she was cognitively impaired. She never could talk. She was not accepted in many schools, and they learned later, when medicine got a little bit more sophisticated, she had had a forceps delivery, and it had damaged the child's brain. She had the permanent mental capacity of a 4-year-old, and Dorothy felt enormous amounts of guilt because of this. Harold avoided the whole situation by spending all of his time in Europe and living like a bachelor, a real mensch. She wrote begging letters to him, to which he never replied, and then he stopped sending any kind of support money. Finally, he wrote to her from Paris and told her the marriage was over. So she raised her daughter Lynn alone until Lynn got physically too big to handle, and Dorothy was desperate and eventually sent her to live with her mother Ruby and her aunt Geneva, which, you have to wonder about that. That's desperate. And then later, the child was placed in a private institution. And Dorothy then was forced to take whatever she could get in the way of acting jobs in order to be able to afford to care for this child. So for the next 10 years, her movie career was lackluster because she just took anything she could get her hands on. Then she was approached by Eric Mills, who became her manager and her friend. And eventually, she accepted his help with her career. At first, she was a bit standoffish. And at first, he had her return to nightclubs. In May of 1951, she opened, excuse me, for Desi Arnaz. I love Lucy. And she was the first African American to perform in the Empire Room in the New York Waldorf Astoria. She toured Miami. She was restricted to staying at Black hotels, performing there. And she asked for the bathroom at a hotel, and she was dismissively handed a plastic cup. There was rampant racism in Las Vegas. We don't think about that as much because it's not the South, but it was bad. They couldn't use, African American performers could not use main entrances. The performers were told between acts or between your shows, you're not allowed to talk to any of the guests. Stay in your room when you're not performing. You can't use any of the public facilities like the restaurant and the pool. They had to have their meals in their room. At one point, she and Eric, her manager, went out to the pool. There was a huge scene about it. She was told to leave after putting one toe in the water. And later she saw that the pool was being drained and cleaned out by a Black employee. Her next movie was Bright Road with Harry Belafonte, and they became lifelong friends. She went back to nightclub performances in South America where there was less racism. She dated the director of Bright Road, Gerald Mayer, and Peter Lawford dated him. We'll be talking about him in another video. And the millionaire from Rio named Christian Marcos. She appeared in magazines, and slowly but surely her career began to rise. She was called this is so obnoxious. She was called the Bronze Bombshell. And she did get a People magazine cover on the back cover in 1953. Her manager heard about Carmen Jones with Otto Preminger was directing and producing this musical, Carmen Jones, based on the opera Carmen, and by Bizet. And it was a big budget, and it was going to be an all-Black cast. And Preminger didn't want her for the lead. He wanted her for the girlfriend of the male lead because she seemed submissive to him. She did her hair and her clothes reflective of the part when she went to try out. And Preminger changed his mind. He loved her in the part. She got involved with Preminger. That sentence recurs consistently throughout Hollywood history. She got involved with Preminger. Her love interest in the movie was Harry Belafonte. And then they dubbed their voices. It's insanity. Otto Preminger am I imagining this? Didn't Mia Farrow have some children with him? Wasn't Mia Farrow when she was really young? Am I imagining that? Or was it Audrey Hepburn? Was somebody with short hair? Okay. Oops. Skipped a page here. This movie was a major success. It won the Golden Globe. It won the Audience Award at the Berlin Film Festival in 1955. She was the first woman on the cover of Ebony magazine and the first African American on a Life cover in 1954. She got rave reviews from our old friend Luella Parsons. She was the first woman of color nominated for an Oscar and also the first Black woman presenter. She didn't get it. She lost to Grace Kelly for The Country Girl. She would only agree to be in integrated pictures. She got a good contract from Zanuck, 20th Century Fox. She got some bad attention with an article saying she had an affair with a bartender in Hollywood, in Hollywood Confidential magazine. But, that was just a rag. She sued, and she sued successfully for libel. It was a lie. Her sister Vivian, her career wasn't good. She drank, and Dorothy tried to help her. She felt that Preminger was the love of her life. He claimed he was not in a good marriage. I guess his wife didn't understand him. But he brought his wife to all the premieres, and he would not file for divorce. So Dorothy went to Cannes with Otto and then took his advice and held out for more than a supporting role in The King and I, and got nothing because of it. And it damaged her relationship with him. Reluctantly, she took stereotypical roles in Porgy and Bess. And the director was changed at the last minute to Otto Preminger, and it was very difficult and awful for her just because of their history. She won a Golden Globe. She got involved with a nightclub owner, Jack Dennison. He told her a sob story, he manipulated her. He told her he had a black lover who had died. And the truth was he had an affair with this woman and then abandoned her and their child. Dorothy didn't know that. Friends warned her, don't marry this guy. He just wants your money. So they got married on June 22nd of 1959. He was controlling. He cut off all of her friends. This sounds very familiar pattern. Cut off her associations with her manager. And she had unexplained bruises before her next movie that had to be covered up before they could film. Then she lost a lot of money in an oil scam and was defrauded by money managers and ended up owing back taxes. Years later, her business manager was found guilty of fraud to the tune of $22.8 million. He defrauded Doris Day. In 1961, Dorothy appeared on Ed Sullivan. She did no other TV shows. She drank, which is really sad. She did another Ebony cover, and it discussed segregation and discrimination in Hollywood. She got an appearance on a TV show in 1962. In April of 63, she filed for bankruptcy. She lost her house and 2 cars. She ended up in debt for $128,000. And the institution where her daughter was being kept dropped her daughter off at Dorothy's house because Dorothy couldn't pay them. That just is mind-blowing. So this girl, her daughter, was 17, and she couldn't talk or wouldn't talk. And she just sat at the piano for hours playing one note while Dorothy sobbed about the situation. She had no choice. She had to make her daughter a ward of the state, and she got sent to the state hospital in Camarillo. And I'm here to tell you, all you have to say is Camarillo in California, and people have a fully formed understanding of what you're talking about. Not a good place. She drank excessively. She made a lot of drunk phone calls. She divorced Dennison and got on antidepressants, which helped her. She lost the role of Cleopatra, which she really coveted, to Elizabeth Taylor. And this was a great blow. In 1964, she reconciled with her manager, and he helped to resurrect her career. She went to a spa in Mexico and performed there, and she performed all over Mexico and Japan. September 8th of 1965, she had an appointment for a cast to be put on her broken foot. And she was found dead in her apartment by Mills in the afternoon. And she had given him a note in May with instructions in case of her death, like arrangements, what he should do. And it was considered her will. And so nobody knows for sure what happened. Did she die of a blood clot from a broken foot? And I actually know somebody who that happened to. She was in her 20s. The autopsy showed that she had OD'd on tofranil, which was her antidepressant. And they don't know accidental or what. She had $4,000 worth of furniture and $2.14 in the bank, and that's all she had. She was cremated and buried at Forest Lawn, and the proceeds from her autobiography then went to care for her daughter. She had written this autobiography. It went to care for her daughter. She got a posthumous star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. Her daughter Lynn, at the writing of this book, was still in an institution. There was a show called Introducing Dorothy Dandridge on HBO, and Halle Berry was on it. She said she had to be sad all day to perform in this movie. And she honored Dorothy in her Academy Award speech. If you've seen that, you should go back and look at that. Okay, this is by, I couldn't read my handwriting, and I now remember, this is, I don't know if this is a source or a person. Lala Vistara, which is the quote that I'm going to read. The spirit of the best men is spotless, like the lotus in the muddy water, which does not adhere to it. In reference to, her purity of spirit and her very difficult life. So that's the great Dorothy Dandridge. Perfect timing. Look at that. I have an appointment. I have to go. I hope you enjoyed this. I really was interested in the life of Dorothy Dandridge. I knew who she was, young, Black, biracial woman, teenager who sang and performed. But the details of her life are so painful. And, So, thank you for watching. And there's more to come, so stay tuned. And slán go bhfuil, slánte.